with all the confidence we can. Unfortunately, we're finding that liberal speakers aren't really willing to take the stage with conservatives, and I find that very unfortunate. In many ways, conservatives have become yesterday's liberals, if you know what I mean. So they're the ones that are more open to debate and to discussion. In many ways, just like the university, the liberal establishment, so to speak, is far less willing to be open to ideas and discussion about key issues in the society.
What is Western civilization?
Well, Western civilization, it's a very good question. Western civilization is a combination of things. I think it's come to stand for the rule of law, the support of democracy as a fundamental principle, human rights, enshrinement of human rights as a key element in human progress, for the advancement of education, for the development of political systems that reflect the will of the people. And those are some broad categories under which you could put Western civilization. Of course, there are fundamental things, such as the focus on the family and the importance, the centrality of the family, or as a family unit is central to Western civilization, Western civilized values. But I think that you could, if you push me, those are the things that I would say are the most important aspects of Western civilization.
Are you part of the shadowy cabal of neoconservatives that pushed America into war in Iraq?
Well,
Jewish neoconservatives.
I don't see myself as a neoconservative. Certainly my personal views may reflect some neoconservative positions, but I wouldn't say that I'm part of any shadowy anything. I'm quite open about my views and my opinions. But the neoconservatives, of course, have got a very bad rap in this country. But I see a lot of, as I said before, a lot of the neoconservatives are just reformed liberals, or actually they're liberals, 1960s liberals, who stayed where they were as just society moved on, and their values are very much in keeping with the classical liberal positions of the early 20th century.
How has your thinking been affected by our intervention in Iraq, if at all?
Well, I supported the war, and I do support the war in Iraq. I have a very different take about the war in Iraq. I don't think that it was designed to thwart the deployment of weapons of mass destruction. I never thought that. I do think that we're in Iraq because the United States needs a presence in the Middle East. And from Iraq it could put tremendous pressure on the countries that foment terrorism around the world: Iran, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Pakistan to some extent as well. And so that's what I think what the strategy was. I don't know if it was carried out in a particularly effective manner. I don't think it was presented or sold in the way it should have been sold to the American public. But the fact that we needed to be there, and as a security measure, with the possibility of ballistic missiles being launched from Iran, with terrorist cells being trained and co-opted in Pakistan and in Iraq and Saudi Arabia. I think that the United States needed to be in Iraq and probably will need to be there for quite some time.
A lot of right-wingers have felt chastened by Iraq. They changed their minds on it. They come back to say it was a mistake. How do you feel when you see fellow travelers on the right?
Well, I think they think what I do, which is that it just wasn't handled in the right way. I mean, there wasn't not enough forces were committed initially. There wasn't a good enough plan for what you're going to do once you're there. I mean, that was the one thing that has astonished me, is that there was really no strategic vision of what was going to be done with Iraq after it was conquered. All the objective was to remove Saddam Hussein and the Ba'athist regime, but then what? So I think that was a serious issue. I've never believed that you can impose democracy on the Arab world. I think that it's a hierarchical, patriarchal society that is resistant to the idea of the dispersion of power and the disbursement of power. It's really quite a shame that has become the mantra of the Bush administration, spreading democracy in the Middle East. I just don't think it was realistic. I just didn't think you could do it, and I still don't think you can do it. Eventually what I think will emerge is some kind of benevolent dictator who will have a relationship with the United States much like the Shah did in Iran. And that's eventually what we'll probably see in Iraq, although I'm hopeful that democracy will take root. But that will take a wholesale reordering of the societies. These are not Western societies, and so it's a very serious problem.
When do you think Israel will be at peace with its neighbours?
I don't think Israel's ever going to really be at peace with its neighbours, because the animus towards Israel is driven by Islam, not driven by, and also perhaps to a certain extent by the dictators who run the countries that surround Israel. But Islam, those exigencies are going to drive a hatred of Israel and a rejection of Israel for the foreseeable future. The only way, I'm a firm believer that the Arab world understands and respects power, and it loathes weakness, and that Israel does have to maintain, if it wants to stay in that part of the world, it has to understand who its neighbours are. They're not like us. They're not Westerners. I keep coming back to this. It's a very different world, and it's a very different way of looking at the world. All the agreements, you can sign all the agreements you want in the world, and you can have all your dinner after your dinners on the White House lawn and ceremonies on the White House lawn. It's not going to make very much difference in the end. What has to happen is change from down below, and I think that one of the great problems in the Arab world is that women have no voice whatsoever, no presence, and without the female touch or the female influence on Western, on Arab society, it's the male aggression is given license. I haven't framed that very well, but I believe that there's a sociological issue here that most people are not really aware of. The Arab world is just a different place. It is a very foreign, alien place to the West. And as Samuel Huntington said, there is a clash of civilizations. We are technically at war with literally at war with the Arab world. And until we come to a realization that we are and that we will be for the foreseeable future, all of our efforts to modernize those countries, to bring them, to change them into who we are not going to succeed.
How does your religion influence your political thinking?
Well, I don't know how it does really. I'm naturally, I'm a God-fearing person. I'm a person who believes in God and believes in God's wisdom. But I don't. My views